The phone rang at exactly 7:32 on a Tuesday morning. Maggie Reynolds knew this because she was staring at the digital clock on her kitchen counter, watching the seconds tick by while her coffee grew cold in her hands. Mrs. Reynolds. The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Yes, this is Margaret Reynolds. Ma'am, this is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Manhattan Police Department. We need you to come down to the station. It's about your husband, Richard Reynolds. The coffee cup slipped from Maggie's fingers, shattering against the marble floor of their Park Avenue penthouse. Mrs. Reynolds, are you there? Maggie stared at the brown liquid spreading across the pristine white marble, watching 22 years of her carefully ordered life begin to crack along the edges. I'm here. What's happened? Is Rick hurt? No, ma'am, he's not hurt, but there's been an incident involving your husband and a young actress named Sophia Blake. The media is already calling it the scandal of the year. Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. She had been cleaning the Reynolds penthouse for 15 years and had never seen Maggie drop so much as a napkin. Mrs. Maggie, are you okay? Maria asked in her gentle accent, already moving to clean up the broken porcelain. Maggie held up a hand to stop her, still clutching the phone. Detective Walsh, what kind of incident? Ma'am, your husband was photographed leaving the Ritz-Carlton at 2 a.m. with Miss Blake. There are also allegations of financial improprieties at his company. We need you to come in and answer some questions. The words hit Maggie like physical blows. Her millionaire ex-husband-to-be had been cheating and apparently stealing. The perfect life she had built, the careful social climbing, the charity galas, the perfectly appointed penthouse, all of it was crumbling. I'll be there in an hour, she managed to say. Mrs. Maggie. Maria was still standing there, broom in hand, looking worried. It's all right, Maria. Just leave it for now. Maggie's voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm. I need to get dressed and go downtown. She walked to her bedroom in a daze, her bare feet silent on the Italian marble. The master suite was a monument to Rick's success, 1,200 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, a custom mahogany headboard that cost more than most people's cars, and a walk-in closet larger than many Manhattan apartments. Maggie stood in front of her mirror, studying the reflection of a 47-year-old woman who had just discovered her entire life was a lie. Her shoulder-length auburn hair was still styled from yesterday's salon appointment. Her skin was smooth, thanks to the best dermatologist money could buy. She was wearing a silk nightgown that cost $800, and none of it mattered anymore. She selected a navy blue Chanel suit armor for whatever was coming. As she dressed, her mind began to work again, moving past the shock towards something harder and more focused. 22 years of marriage, and she was finding out from a police detective that her husband was having an affair. Not from Rick himself, not from the society gossips who usually knew everything first, but from a stranger on the phone. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt eternal. Harold, the doorman, tipped his hat as she passed. Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. Shall I call you a car? Yes, please. The police station, downtown. If Harold was surprised, he didn't show it. In Manhattan, the wealthy had all kinds of unusual destinations. The taxi ride through morning traffic gave Maggie time to think. She pulled out her phone and did what she had been avoiding. She Googled her husband's name. The headlines were everywhere. CEO Richard Reynolds caught in hotel rendezvous with actress Sophia Blake. Coronavirus, Reynolds Industries stock plummets amid scandal. Power couple, divorce looming. The photos were damning. Rick, her distinguished 52-year-old husband, caught in what was clearly a lover's embrace with a woman young enough to be his daughter. Sophia Blake, 28 years old, blonde, beautiful, and everything Maggie was not. Her phone buzzed with text messages from concerned friends, but she ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later. The police station was a granite fortress in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by news vans and photographers. Maggie paid the taxi driver and walked through the crowd with her head high, ignoring the shouted questions and camera flashes. Mrs. Reynolds, how long have you known about the affair? Margaret, will you be filing for divorce? Any comment on your husband's business practices? She pushed through the glass doors of the precinct, grateful for the relative quiet inside. Mrs. Reynolds, a woman in her 40s, approached, badge visible on her belt. I'm Detective Walsh. Thank you for coming in. What exactly is going on, Detective? Let's sit down and I'll explain everything. They settled into a small conference room with fluorescent lighting and industrial carpet. Detective Walsh opened a thick file folder. Mrs. Reynolds, we've been investigating some irregularities at Reynolds Industries for several months. Last night, we were conducting surveillance when we observed your husband meeting with Miss Blake. During the course of that surveillance, we discovered evidence of what appears to be embezzlement from his own company. The words washed over Maggie like ice water. Embezzlement. It appears your husband has been moving funds from the company's charitable foundation into personal accounts. We're talking about several $1,000,000 over the past 3 years. Maggie felt something cold settle in her stomach. The charitable foundation was her baby. She had founded it, run it, organized every fundraiser. Her name was on every board document. Detective, are you saying I'm under investigation too? Right now, we're just gathering information. But Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask, did you have any knowledge of these financial transfers? Absolutely not. The answer came swiftly and with complete certainty. I run the day-to-day operations of the foundation, but Rick handles all the financial oversight. He always said it was too complicated for me to worry about. Even as she said it, Maggie felt a flash of anger at her own words. Too complicated for her to worry about. As if she were a child who couldn't understand money. We'll need you to come in again tomorrow with your attorney to give a formal statement, Detective Walsh said. For now, I'd recommend you contact a good divorce lawyer. And Mrs. Reynolds. Yes. I'd also recommend you freeze any joint accounts and get copies of all your financial records. Today, Maggie walked out of the police station feeling like she was moving underwater. Everything looked different now. The morning sunlight seemed harsher, the traffic louder, the faces of strangers more hostile. Her phone was ringing constantly. Friends, reporters, business associates. She turned it off and hailed another taxi. Where to, lady? She almost said home, then stopped. That penthouse wasn't home anymore. It was just another beautiful prison she had been living in without realizing it. Reynolds Industries, she said. Midtown. It was time to confront her millionaire ex-husband face to face. The glass towers of Midtown Manhattan gleamed in the morning sun as Maggie's taxi pulled up to Reynolds Industries. The 50-story building was Rick's monument to himself, his name etched in gold letters across the marble facade. 3 hours after the phone call that changed everything, Maggie stood in the marble lobby watching employees whisper and point. Word traveled fast in the corporate world, and everyone knew something was wrong when the CEO's wife showed up looking like she was ready for war. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to an execution. Maggie watched the numbers climb, each floor taking her closer to a confrontation she had never imagined having. Rick's secretary, Amanda, looked up with barely concealed panic when Maggie stepped off the elevator. Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds he's in a meeting, a very important meeting. Maybe you could come back later. Amanda, I've known you for 8 years. Don't lie to me now. Maggie's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath the silk. Where is my husband? Boardroom B, Amanda whispered, unable to meet her eyes. Maggie walked down the hallway she had traveled hundreds of times for company events and Christmas parties. The walls were lined with photos of Rick shaking hands with politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. In many of them, she stood beside him, smiling and elegant, the perfect corporate wife. She paused outside the heavy wooden doors of Boardroom B, hearing voices inside, Rick's familiar baritone, along with several others she recognized as senior executives. The bottom line is, we need to contain this story, Rick was saying. I don't care what it costs. Pay off whoever needs to be paid off. Threaten whoever needs to be threatened. Rick, the photos are already everywhere, another voice replied. And the police investigation? Let me worry about the police. I've donated enough to their benevolent fund over the years. They'll play ball. Maggie pushed open the doors without knocking. 7 men in expensive suits turned to stare at her. Rick was standing at the head of the conference table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his Armani suit immaculate. He looked every inch the successful CEO until you saw his eyes. "Gentlemen," Rick said after a moment of stunned silence, "could you give my wife and me a few minutes?" The executives filed out like scolded children, none of them making eye contact with Maggie. When the door closed behind them, the silence in the room was deafening. "Maggie," Rick began, his voice taking on the tone he used when explaining simple concepts to people he considered beneath him. "I know how this must look. Let's cut to the chase." "Rick," she used his own phrase, throwing it back at him. "How long? How long what? Don't insult my intelligence. How long have you been sleeping with Sophia Blake?" Rick straightened his tie, a nervous habit he had when cornered. "Maggie, this is complicated. You wouldn't understand the pressures I'm under. The demands of running a company this size. How long?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Rick walked to the windows overlooking the city, his back to her. 8 months, he said finally. 8 months. While Maggie had been planning charity galas and hosting dinner parties, while she had been playing the perfect wife, he had been building a new life without her. And the embezzlement. Rick spun around, his face flushing red. "That's not embezzlement. That money was always mine. I built this company from nothing. I created that foundation." "I created that foundation," Maggie interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. "I wrote the mission statement. I organized every event. I courted every donor. And you've been stealing from it." "I haven't been stealing anything. I've been moving assets to protect them from potential litigation. It's called financial planning." "Maggie." "But you wouldn't understand the complexities." "Stop!" The word came out like a whip crack. "Stop talking to me like I'm an idiot. Richard, I may not have an MBA from Wharton, but I'm not stupid." For just a moment, something flickered across Rick's face that might have been regret, but it was gone so quickly Maggie might have imagined it. "Maggie, sit down. Let's discuss this like adults." "I am discussing it like an adult. You're the one who's been acting like a teenager with a credit card." She remained standing, her hands gripping the back of a leather chair. "Tell me about Sophia. What about her? Is she pregnant?" The silence stretched between them. Rick's jaw tightened, and Maggie had her answer before he spoke. "Yes." The word hit her like a physical blow. 22 years of marriage, and they had never been able to have children. It wasn't for lack of trying. They had spent a fortune on fertility specialists, endured years of tests and procedures and disappointments. Rick had always claimed it didn't matter, that their life was perfect without children. Apparently, it only didn't matter when the children would have been Maggie's. "How far along is she?" 4 months. 4 months. Maggie did the math quickly. Sophia Blake had gotten pregnant around the time of Rick's 50th birthday party, the elaborate celebration Maggie had spent 3 months planning. "I want a divorce," Rick said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush. "Maggie, I want a divorce. Sophia's pregnant, and I want to marry her." There it was. 22 years dismissed in 2 sentences. "I see." Maggie's voice was steady, but inside she felt something fundamental shift, the last piece of her old life falling away. "And you thought you'd soften the blow by stealing millions of dollars first." "I haven't stolen anything," Rick snapped. "Everything I've done has been legal. And frankly, Maggie, you should be grateful. Do you think you'd have had any of this without me?" He gestured around the opulent boardroom. "The penthouse, the clothes, the lifestyle. You were nobody when I met you. A secretary in a law firm." "A paralegal," Maggie corrected quietly. "Whatever. The point is, I made you. I gave you a life you never could have had on your own. And now you're acting like you're entitled to destroy everything I've built because I fell in love with someone else." The words stung because there was just enough truth in them to hurt. Maggie had been a paralegal when they met, working long hours for modest pay, sharing a studio apartment with a roommate. Rick had swept her into a world of privilege she had never dreamed of, but she had earned her place in that world. She had been the perfect corporate wife, the gracious hostess, the tireless charity organizer. She had subordinated her own ambitions to his, her own identity to his success. And now he was dismissing all of it as if she had been nothing more than an expensive accessory. "You're right about one thing, Rick," she said finally. "I was nobody when you met me, but I'm not nobody now." "What's that supposed to mean?" It means you're about to find out exactly what kind of woman you've been married to for 22 years. She turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Rick, you might want to call your attorney, because I'm about to call mine. She walked out of the boardroom with her head high, leaving Rick standing alone among the scattered papers of his empire. In the elevator going down, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Terrifying, exhilarating freedom. Her phone had 17 missed calls. She ignored them all except one, a text from Janet Cooper, her best friend since college. Saw the news and coming over with wine and tissues. And my lawyer's number, for the first time in hours. Maggie smiled. That evening, Maggie sat in Janet Cooper's Brooklyn brownstone, surrounded by the comforting sounds of family life, teenagers arguing upstairs, a dog barking in the backyard, and the smell of something delicious coming from the kitchen. Honey, let me tell you something, Janet said, pouring 2 generous glasses of red wine. Men like Rick don't change. They just get more expensive tastes. Janet was everything Maggie wasn't: loud, opinionated, and completely comfortable in her own skin. She had been Maggie's roommate in college and had remained her closest friend through 2 decades of very different lives. While Maggie had married wealth, Janet had married for love and built a chaotic, happy family with her architect husband. I keep thinking I should have seen it coming, Maggie said, accepting the wine gratefully. All those late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply over the past year. Oh, please. The only thing you should have seen coming is a parade of women throwing themselves at your rich husband. Honey, you trusted him because that's what wives do. Janet settled into her favorite armchair, a well-worn piece that would have made Rick sneer. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Today I felt like I was somebody else, standing up to him like that. But now, Maggie gestured helplessly. What am I without him? I don't have a career. I don't have my own money. Stop right there. Janet's voice was sharp. You've been running a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation for 10 years. You've organized events that raised more money than most small countries see in a year. You speak 3 languages, you have a master's degree, and you're one of the smartest people I know. Don't you dare diminish yourself because some narcissistic ex-husband made you feel small. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. I just feel so stupid. Janet, 22 years, and I never suspected anything. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you trusting. There's a difference. Janet leaned forward. Now, what did your lawyer say? I haven't called one yet. What, Maggie? You need to protect yourself. If Rick's been moving money around, I know. I'll call someone tomorrow. Maggie set down her wine glass. I need to go home and get some things first. Important papers, jewelry, anything I don't want to lose in the divorce settlement. Want me to come with you? No, I need to do this alone. An hour later, Maggie stood in her penthouse for what felt like the last time. The place looked different now, like a museum exhibit, How the Other Half Lives, circa 2025. The fresh flowers Rick had delivered weekly, the art they had collected together, the photos of their supposedly happy life, all of it felt foreign. She walked to Rick's study, a masculine sanctuary of dark wood and leather where he conducted his most private business. She had always been welcome there, but she had rarely lingered. It was Rick's domain. Now she studied it with new eyes, looking for secrets. His desk revealed nothing. Rick was too smart to leave evidence lying around. But there was a safe hidden behind a fake bookshelf. And Maggie knew the combination because Rick had never bothered to change it from their wedding anniversary, 051-82003. The safe was larger than she had expected, filled with documents she had never seen. Stock certificates, real estate deeds, insurance policies, the paper trail of their life together, all carefully organized in Rick's meticulous way. At the bottom of the pile, she found something that made her hands shake: adoption papers with her name on them. Margaret Sarah Harrison, born May 18, 1978. Adopted by James and Linda Morrison, September 3, 1978. Maggie stared at the papers, her mind reeling. She had always known she was adopted. The Morrisons had told her when she was old enough to understand. But she had never known her birth name or anything about her biological parents. The papers listed her birth father as William Harrison of Dallas, Texas. Age at time of birth, 25. Occupation, oil industry. There was a phone number handwritten in the margin, with a note in Rick's careful script, emergency contact only. Maggie's hands were trembling as she pulled out her phone and Googled, William Harrison Dallas Oil. The results made her sink into Rick's leather chair. William Harrison was not just in the oil industry, he was the oil industry in Texas. Harrison Petroleum was one of the largest privately held oil companies in the United States, worth an estimated $8 billion. And according to the search results, William Harrison had been searching for his daughter for over 40 years. Well, Maggie whispered to herself, using the phrase her adoptive father had always said when he was surprised. She photographed every document in the safe, then carefully put everything back exactly as she had found it. But she kept the adoption papers and the phone number. Walking through the penthouse one last time, Maggie packed a small suitcase with essentials. As she was closing the bedroom closet, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news about your husband. If you want to know the truth about what he's been doing, meet me at Cafe Luna tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. A friend. Maggie stared at the message, then deleted it. She had enough truth for one day. But as she left the penthouse, she realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in 22 years, she was not Richard Reynolds' wife. She was Margaret Harrison's daughter, and that might change everything. Back at Janet's house, she showed her friend the adoption papers. Holy shit. Maggie, Janet breathed, staring at the documents. Do you realize what this means? It means I might have family I never knew about. It means you might have 8 billion reasons not to worry about Rick's divorce settlement. Maggie looked at the phone number again. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to call a stranger who might be her father or continue trying to salvage a life that was already in ruins. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. Maybe this changed everything. The next morning brought the sound of a private jet's engines warming up on the tarmac at JFK. Maggie had made the phone call to Texas at dawn, her hands shaking as she dialed the number from Rick's safe. Harrison Residence, a woman with a thick Southern accent had answered. This is Margaret Reynolds. I'm calling for William Harrison. I believe he might be my father. The silence on the other end had lasted so long that Maggie thought the call had been dropped. Then she heard a man's voice in the background, deep and commanding. Give me that phone. Margaret. The voice was exactly what she had imagined, a Texas drawl softened by age and emotion. Is this really you, little girl? The endearment had broken something inside her. I think so. I have adoption papers that list you as my birth father. Now listen here, young lady. I've been looking for you for 47 years. Where are you, New York? I'm sending my plane. Don't you move until I get there. That had been 6 hours ago. Now Maggie sat in the luxury cabin of a Gulfstream jet, watching the landscape of America pass beneath her at 40,000 feet. She had never flown private before Rick considered it an unnecessary expense, and the quiet elegance of it felt surreal. The flight attendant, a woman about Maggie's age with kind eyes, brought her coffee in real china. Mr. Harrison is very excited to see you, she said. He's been carrying a picture of you as a baby for longer than I've worked for him. How long is that? 23 years. And in all that time, I've never seen him as happy as he was this morning when he heard you were coming home. Home. The word felt strange. Maggie had never thought of Texas as home. She had been born there, but raised in upstate New York by the Morrisons. Good people who had given her a stable, middle-class childhood, but they had died in a car accident 10 years ago, leaving her with no family except Rick. The plane began its descent over Dallas, and Maggie pressed her face to the window. The city sprawled endlessly in all directions, a monument to oil money and Texas ambition. First time in Dallas, the flight attendant asked. First time back, Maggie corrected. The Harrison Ranch was 40 minutes outside the city, accessible by a private road that stretched for miles through rolling hills and oil derricks. Maggie sat in the back of a black Range Rover, watching the landscape that should have been familiar but felt completely foreign. The house, when it finally came into view, was not what she had expected. Instead of a gaudy mansion, it was an elegant, sprawling ranch house, all natural stone and weathered wood, built to complement the landscape rather than dominate it. A man was waiting on the front porch. William Harrison was 72 years old, according to the adoption papers, but he carried himself like a much younger man. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, he radiated the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of success. But when Maggie stepped out of the car, all that confidence seemed to melt away. "My God," he whispered, walking down the steps toward her. "You look just like your mother." They stood facing each other in the Texas sunshine, a father and daughter meeting for the first time in 47 years. "I don't remember her," Maggie said quietly. "She was the most beautiful woman I ever knew, and the kindest." William's voice was rough with emotion. "She died when you were 6 months old. Car accident on a rainy night, just like how you lost your adoptive parents. Some families seem cursed with tragedy. Why didn't you keep me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. William gestured toward the porch chairs. "Sit with me, and I'll tell you everything." They settled into comfortable rocking chairs overlooking the ranch. In the distance, horses grazed in green pastures. "I was 25 when you were born," William began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a man telling a story he had rehearsed in his mind for decades. "Young and stupid and completely overwhelmed by becoming a father. Your mother, Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She was only 22. We weren't married, which was a bigger scandal than it is now." He paused and staring out at the horizon. "When she died, I fell apart. Started drinking, stopped working, nearly lost everything my father had built. My own father sat me down and told me I had two choices. I could pull myself together and raise you properly, or I could give you to a family who could love you the way you deserved while I got my life back on track. And you chose the family. I chose what I thought was best for you. The Morrisons were good people, Sarah's cousin and her husband. They couldn't have children of their own, and they promised to love you like their own. William's voice broke slightly. "I told myself I would come for you when I was ready to be the father you needed. But you never did. I tried. God, how I tried. But every time I got close, every time I hired another detective or followed another lead, something went wrong. The adoption was sealed. Records were lost. The Morrisons moved and changed their name. By the time I finally tracked you down, you were 25 and married to that snake you call a husband." Maggie felt a flare of protective anger, even though she was furious with Rick herself. "You've been watching me." "I've been trying to protect you," William said firmly. "Do you think it was a coincidence that your husband's company got all those favorable oil contracts over the years? Do you think he built his empire entirely on his own merit?" The words hit Maggie like a sledgehammer. "You've been helping Rick. I've been helping you. Every success he had meant a better life for you. Every contract I threw his way was my way of providing for the daughter I couldn't claim." Maggie stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. "You've been manipulating my entire life without me knowing it. I've been loving you the only way I could." William's voice was steady but sad. "And now that snake is throwing you away for some young actress, after everything I've done for him. He doesn't know, does he, about you being my father? He has no idea, but he's about to find out." William's voice took on a harder edge. "That boy thinks he can steal from you, humiliate you, and walk away clean. He's about to learn what happens when you cross a Harrison." Maggie turned to face him. "What do you mean?" Before William could answer, Maggie's phone rang. The caller ID showed David Martinez, Rick's lawyer. "Mrs. Reynolds." David's voice was carefully professional. "In my professional opinion, you need to know that your husband filed for divorce this morning. He's also attempting to freeze all marital assets and claim that you have no legal right to any portion of his business holdings." Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. "Can he do that?" "He can try. Mrs. Reynolds, I need to tell you something else. There are also criminal charges being filed. The district attorney's office believes you may have been involved in the embezzlement from the charitable foundation." "That's impossible. I had nothing to do with—" "I know that, and you know that. But the evidence is pointing in your direction. I think your husband is setting you up to take the fall for his crimes." The phone felt heavy in Maggie's hand. "What should I do?" "Get the best criminal defense attorney you can afford, and do it today." Maggie hung up and looked at William, who had been listening to every word. "Now listen here, young lady," he said, standing up with the slow deliberation of a man making a decision. "That snake thinks he can destroy my daughter and walk away. He just made the biggest mistake of his miserable life. What are you going to do? William smiled, and for the first time, Maggie saw where she had gotten her own steal. Darling, you're about to learn what real power looks like. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, the story was breaking on every news channel in the city. This is Channel 7 News at noon. I'm reporting live from outside Reynolds Industries, where sources tell us that CEO Richard Reynolds' divorce from his wife Margaret has taken a dramatic turn. Federal prosecutors are now investigating alleged embezzlement from the Reynolds Family Foundation, a charity that has raised over $50 million for children's causes over the past decade. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman in a red suit, stood in front of the glass towers of Midtown as employees streamed past behind her. What makes this story particularly shocking is that Mrs. Reynolds, who founded and operated the charity, is now being investigated as a potential accomplice in the theft of funds that were meant to help disadvantaged children. Meanwhile, her husband has very publicly moved on with actress Sophia Blake, who is reportedly pregnant with his child. Inside her Brooklyn brownstone, Janet Cooper was fielding phone calls and growing increasingly angry. "No comment! You vultures!" She snapped into the phone before hanging up on the third reporter in 10 minutes. "These people are like sharks smelling blood in the water." Her teenage daughter Emma wandered into the kitchen, looking concerned. "Mom, why are there news vans outside?" "Because people are idiots who think they have a right to destroy someone's life for entertainment," Janet replied, pouring herself a very large cup of coffee. The phone rang again. Janet glanced at the caller ID and softened her expression. "Maggie, thank God." "Where are you, Texas?" Maggie's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "Janet, they're trying to frame me for Rick's embezzlement." "I know, honey. It's all over the news. But Maggie, there's something else you need to know. I've been getting calls from reporters all morning, and they're digging into everything. Your past, your adoptive parents, even your college years. What are they finding? Nothing bad, but they're asking questions about how a paralegal ended up married to a millionaire. They're trying to paint you as some kind of gold digger." On the other end of the line, Maggie felt a familiar surge of anger. "Let them dig. They're about to find out I'm not as defenseless as they think." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not just Richard Reynolds' cast-off wife anymore. I'm William Harrison's daughter." Janet nearly dropped the phone. "The oil guy Maggie, are you serious?" "Dead serious." And Janet Rick's about to find out that he picked the wrong woman to mess with. While Maggie was in Texas discovering her true heritage, the media storm in New York was reaching hurricane strength. Outside the Park Avenue penthouse, reporters had set up a semi-permanent camp, their cameras trained on the building's elegant entrance. Rick had barricaded himself in his office, refusing to take calls and snapping at anyone who tried to approach him. The stress was showing. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Sir," Amanda knocked hesitantly on his office door. "Miss Blake is here to see you." "Send her in," Rick growled, not looking up from the legal documents scattered across his desk. Sophia Blake swept into the office like she was making an entrance on stage. Even at 4 months pregnant, she was stunning, all golden hair and dramatic curves, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Darling," she purred, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You look terrible." "It's been a difficult day," Rick replied tersely. "The media won't leave us alone. My lawyers are telling me the criminal investigation is more serious than we thought, and Maggie seems to have disappeared." "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean, she's not answering her phone. She's not at that friend's house in Brooklyn, and security at the penthouse says she hasn't been back since yesterday." Rick looked up at Sophia for the first time. "This isn't going according to plan." Sophia examined her perfectly manicured nails. "Darling, I told you that dumping your wife in the middle of a criminal investigation was bad timing. You should have waited until after the legal troubles were resolved." "I couldn't wait." "You're pregnant. The media already knew about us, and I needed to get ahead of the story." Rick rubbed his temples. "Besides, what can Maggie do? She's a housewife with no money of her own and no connections outside of the ones I gave her." "Maybe, but a desperate housewife can be dangerous, darling, especially one who knows where all the bodies are buried." Rick's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He glanced at it and felt his blood pressure spike. Your husband doesn't know the whole truth about what he's done. Meet me at Cafe Luna at 8 p.m. if you want to help him before it's too late. A friend of Maggie's. What is it? Sophia asked, noting his expression. Nothing. Just more reporters trying to get a story. Rick deleted the message, but something about it nagged at him. Who would claim to be a friend of Maggie's and want to help him across town? The mysterious sender of that text was sitting in another office, making a very different kind of phone call. Mr. Harrison, this is David Martinez, Mrs. Reynolds' lawyer. I think it's time we discussed your daughter's situation. William Harrison's voice came through the phone with the force of a winter storm. Mr. Martinez, I've been waiting for someone to call me. How much trouble is my little girl in? More than she realizes, sir. Her husband has been very thorough in setting her up to take the fall for his crimes, but with your resources and my knowledge of the case, I think we can turn the tables on him. What do you need me to do? For now, just be patient. Mrs. Reynolds needs to return to New York and face this head on. But when she does, I want to make sure she has every advantage we can give her. Money's no object. It's not about money, Mr. Harrison. It's about power. And your daughter is about to learn that she has more of both than she ever imagined. As the sun set over Manhattan, the pieces of a much larger game were falling into place. Rick thought he held all the cards, but he was about to discover that some players had been sitting at the table much longer than he realized. And tomorrow, when Maggie returned to New York, the real battle would begin. The following Monday, Maggie walked into the most expensive law firm in Manhattan, her heels clicking confidently on marble floors that rivaled anything in Rick's building. The Gulf Stream had brought her back to New York that morning, but she was returning as a completely different woman than the one who had fled in shock just days before. Whitman. Sterling and Associates occupied an entire floor of a Park Avenue skyscraper. Their reception area decorated with original oil paintings and leather furniture that whispered of old money and older power. Mrs. Reynolds. A receptionist with a crisp British accent smiled at her. Mr. Whitman is ready to see you. Charles Whitman was exactly what Maggie had expected, 70 years old, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But his handshake was firm, and his eyes were sharp with intelligence. Mrs. Reynolds, please sit down. I've been reviewing your case with great interest. His office overlooked Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. Legal books lined the walls, and degrees from Harvard and Yale hung in discreet frames. Mr. Whitman, I need to understand exactly what I'm facing, Maggie said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than her first car. Let me be direct. Mrs. Reynolds, your husband has orchestrated a sophisticated financial shell game designed to steal millions of dollars from your charitable foundation while making you appear to be the mastermind. Whitman opened a thick file folder. He's been moving money through offshore accounts, creating false documentation, and preparing to claim that you were the one with access and motive. But that's not true. Of course it's not true, but the evidence he's created is quite convincing. He's been planning this for at least 2 years. Mrs. Reynolds, this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated decision to destroy you financially and legally while protecting himself. Maggie felt something cold settle in her stomach. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $12 million over 3 years. The number hung in the air between them like a death sentence. $12 million enough to send her to prison for the rest of her life. However, Whitman continued, and something in his tone made Maggie look up sharply, there are some interesting developments that change the equation considerably. What kind of developments? Well, first, let's discuss your prenuptial agreement. You signed one? Correct? Yes. But Rick's lawyers wrote it. It basically says I get nothing if we divorce. Ordinarily, that would be true. However, there's a clause that voids the entire agreement in cases of adultery or criminal behavior on the part of your husband. Since Mr. Reynolds is guilty of both, the prenuptial agreement is worthless. Maggie felt a flicker of hope. So I would be entitled to half of his assets. Actually, Mrs. Reynolds, you'd be entitled to considerably more than that. Whitman smiled, and it was the smile of a shark who had spotted blood in the water. You see, there's something your husband doesn't know about your financial situation. I don't have a financial situation. Everything is in his name. Mrs. Reynolds, are you familiar with Harrison Petroleum? The question seemed to come from nowhere. I know it's a large oil company in Texas. Why? Because, Mrs. Reynolds, you own 12% of it and have since you turned 21. The words hit her like a physical blow. That's impossible. Your biological father, William Harrison, has been placing stock in your name for over 25 years. He set up a trust that matured when you turned 21. But the documentation was sealed pending your consent to claim it. Whitman pulled out another set of papers. These stock transfers have been sitting in an escrow account, waiting for you to acknowledge your identity as his daughter. Maggie stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the numbers. How much is 12% of Harrison Petroleum worth? At current market value, approximately $200 million. The office seemed to tilt around her. $200 million. She had spent 2 days thinking she was broke and facing criminal charges, and now this lawyer was telling her she was worth more money than she could comprehend. Well, she whispered, using her adoptive father's favorite phrase. There's more. Mrs. Reynolds, your father has also been documenting every business deal he facilitated for your husband over the years. Every oil contract, every favorable agreement, every behind-the-scenes manipulation that helped build Reynolds Industries into what it is today. He kept records, meticulous records, including recordings of conversations where your husband acknowledged that his success was due to Mr. Harrison's influence. Whitman leaned forward. Mrs. Reynolds, your father built your husband's empire as a way of providing for you. And now that your husband has betrayed you, Mr. Harrison is prepared to destroy everything he helped create. Maggie stood up and walked to the windows, looking down at the city that had been her home for over 20 years. Everything looked different from up here, smaller, more manageable. Mrs. Reynolds, Whitman said gently, many women your age think it's too late to start over when their marriage ends. They think they're too old, too set in their ways, too dependent on the lives they've built. But you're about to prove that assumption completely wrong. She turned back to face him. What do you need me to do? First, we file for divorce and request emergency injunctions to freeze all of your husband's assets pending investigation of the embezzlement charges. Second, we present evidence that you were manipulated and deceived by your husband, making you a victim rather than an accomplice. Third, we reveal your true financial position and make it clear that you have the resources to fight this battle for as long as necessary. And fourth, Whitman's smile was predatory. Fourth, we destroy your husband so completely that he'll spend the rest of his life wishing he had never heard the name Harrison. Maggie felt something shift inside her, something hard and determined that she had never known existed. Mr. Whitman, I have one question. Yes. How quickly can we move on this? How does tomorrow morning sound? Perfect. As Maggie left the law office, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she held all the power. Rick thought he was playing chess while she was playing checkers. He was about to find out that she had been playing a completely different game all along. That evening, Maggie stood in her penthouse for what she knew would be the last time, listening to the sounds of the city below. The space that had once felt like a palace now seemed like a museum, beautiful, expensive, and completely empty of real life. Janet was helping her pack, carefully wrapping the few personal items Maggie wanted to keep. I still can't believe it, Janet said, placing a framed photo of Maggie's adoptive parents in a protective box. $200 million. Honey, do you realize you're richer than some small countries? It doesn't feel real yet, Maggie admitted, taking one last look around the master bedroom. 24 hours ago, I thought I was going to lose everything. Now I find out I never needed Rick's money in the first place. That's got to sting a little. What stings is realizing that my father has been watching over me my entire adult life, and I never knew it. Maggie picked up a jewelry box from her dressing table. All those years I thought Rick was this brilliant businessman, and it turns out he was just the beneficiary of my father's generosity. Honey, let me tell you something, Janet said, using her favorite phrase. Karma has a wicked sense of timing. Your narcissistic ex-husband picked the worst possible woman to betray. Maggie's phone rang. The caller ID showed William Harrison. Hello, Daddy, she said, the words still feeling strange on her tongue. How are you holding up, little girl? Better than I expected. Charles Whitman explained everything to me today. Charlie's a good man. He's been my lawyer for 30 years. William's voice was warm but serious. Are you ready for what comes next? I think so, but I need to ask you something. Anything. Why didn't you just tell me the truth years ago? Why let me stay married to Rick when you knew what kind of man he was? The silence on the other end lasted so long that Maggie thought the connection had been lost. Because I was a coward, William said finally. I was afraid that if I contacted you, you'd reject me. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to buy your love after abandoning you as a baby. So I convinced myself that helping you from a distance was enough. And now I realize that I've wasted 47 years being afraid when I could have been getting to know my daughter. I don't want to waste any more time. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. Neither do I. Good. Because tomorrow, we're going to show that snake exactly what happens when he messes with a Harrison woman. After she hung up, Maggie made several strategic phone calls. First, to the society reporter at the New York Post who had been calling her for days. This is Margaret Reynolds. I understand you've been trying to reach me. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for calling back. We'd love to get your side of the story about your husband's affair and the criminal charges. I'll give you an exclusive interview, Maggie interrupted. But only if you agree to publish exactly what I tell you. When I tell you to publish it, well, that's not usually how. Patterson, do you want the story of the year? Or do you want to keep chasing down leads that will be old news by next week? There was a pause. What kind of story are we talking about? The kind that ends careers and starts new ones? Are you interested? Very interested. Good. I'll call you tomorrow evening with the details. Next, she called the event planner who had organized charity galas for the foundation. Caroline, it's Maggie Reynolds. I need you to organize an event for tomorrow night. Maggie, I heard about the divorce. Are you all right? I'm better than all right. I need you to put together a small gathering, maybe 50 people. The usual crowd, but make sure Richard and Sophia Blake are invited. Are you sure that's wise given everything that's happening? Caroline, trust me on this. And make sure you mention that I have a major announcement to make about the future of the foundation. Her final call was to David Martinez, Rick's lawyer, who had been trying to reach her for days. Mr. Martinez, this is Margaret Reynolds. I understand you've been trying to contact me. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for calling back. I wanted to discuss a possible plea agreement regarding the embezzlement charges. I'm not interested in a plea agreement. Mrs. Reynolds, I think you should consider your options carefully. The evidence against you is quite compelling, and the prosecution is offering a very generous deal. Mr. Martinez, let me save you some time. I'm not going to plead guilty to crimes I didn't commit to protect my husband from the consequences of crimes he did commit. Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think you understand the seriousness of your situation. I understand it perfectly. The question is, do you understand yours? I'm afraid I don't follow. You will tomorrow. Good evening, Mr. Martinez. As Maggie finished packing her personal belongings, her phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Maggie, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Call me. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, You're right. Richard, this has gone too far. But we'll talk tomorrow. At the plaza? Come alone. His response came back immediately. What's at the plaza? Your reckoning. Janet looked up from the box she was packing. Are you sure you're ready for this? Janet, I've spent 22 years being the perfect corporate wife. I've been polite, supportive, and accommodating. I've let people underestimate me because it was easier than fighting. Maggie sealed the last box and looked around the empty penthouse. But that woman is gone, and tomorrow, everyone is going to meet the real Margaret Harrison. I love the sound of that name. So do I. As they left the penthouse together, Maggie felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. She wasn't just leaving a marriage, she was leaving behind a version of herself that had been too small for the life she was meant to live. Tomorrow at the Plaza Hotel, Richard Reynolds would discover that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and she was going to enjoy every minute of watching him realize it. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel buzzed with the chatter of New York's elite, crystal glasses clinking and orchestra music floating through the air. Caroline had outdone herself on short notice. The ballroom was decorated with white orchids and golden lighting. creating an atmosphere of elegant intimacy that whispered of old money and older secrets. Maggie stood in the private elevator leading to the ballroom, wearing a navy blue Valentino gown that had cost $15,000 money she had spent from her newly discovered Harrison Petroleum account with something approaching glee. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore diamond earrings that had belonged to her birth mother, a gift from William that morning. "You look beautiful, little girl," William said, adjusting his black tie. At 72, he was still an imposing figure, his silver hair perfectly styled and his tuxedo immaculate. "Your mother would be so proud." "Are you sure this is the right approach?" Maggie asked, feeling butterflies in her stomach. "Maybe we should have just let the lawyers handle everything." "Darling, men like your husband only understand one thing: public humiliation. He tried to destroy you in the most public way possible, so we're going to return the favor." William's smile was sharp. "Besides, don't you think it's time New York society met the real Margaret Harrison?" The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the ballroom together. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as heads turned to stare at Maggie and the distinguished older man beside her. She had attended hundreds of these events over the years, always as Richard Reynolds' wife, always in his shadow. Tonight, she was the center of attention. "Is that Margaret Reynolds?" she heard someone whisper. "Who's that man with her? She looks different, stronger." Maggie walked through the crowd with her head high, accepting air kisses and polite greetings from people who had been avoiding her calls for days. Amazing how quickly attitudes changed when you arrived with obvious wealth and power. "Margaret, darling," Caroline rushed over, her event planner's smile slightly strained. "You look absolutely stunning, and this must be your guest. Caroline, I'd like you to meet my father, William Harrison." If Caroline recognized the name, she was too professional to show it, but Maggie caught the slight widening of her eyes. "It's lovely to meet you, Mr. Harrison. Margaret has told us so much about you." "Actually," Maggie said with a smile, "I've only known him for a few days myself. We have quite a lot of catching up to do." Across the ballroom, she spotted Rick standing near the bar with Sophia Blake. Even from a distance, she could see his confusion and growing alarm as he watched her work the room with an ease and confidence he had never seen before. Sophia was magnificent in a red dress that showed off her pregnancy curves, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves. She looked like a movie star, which, Maggie reminded herself, she was. "Shall we go say hello to your husband?" William asked, offering her his arm. "Ex-husband," Maggie corrected. "And yes, let's." They crossed the ballroom like a ship cutting through water, the crowd parting before them. Rick's face grew paler with each step they took toward him. "Richard," Maggie said when they reached the bar. "You look surprised to see me." "Maggie," Rick's voice was tight with controlled tension. "I didn't expect you to come tonight." "Really? But you're always telling me how important it is to maintain appearances." She turned to Sophia with a smile that never reached her eyes. "And you must be Sophia." "Congratulations on your pregnancy." Sophia lifted her chin defiantly. "Thank you, darling. Richard and I are very happy." "I'm sure you are." Maggie's voice was pleasantly neutral. "Richard, I'd like you to meet my father, William Harrison." The color drained completely from Rick's face. "Your father?" "That's right, son," William said, his Texas drawl more pronounced than usual. "Margaret's father, the one who's been watching over her for the past 22 years. Rick's wineglass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "You're William Harrison, of Harrison Petroleum." "I am indeed, and you're the snake who's been stealing from my daughter." The conversation around them was starting to attract attention. Other guests were drifting closer, sensing drama. "I don't know what you think you know," Rick began, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I know everything. Boy, every contract I threw your way, every deal I facilitated, every favor I called in to help build your little empire." William's voice was calm but carrying, designed to be heard. "I know about the $12 million you stole from the children's charity. I know about the false documents you created to frame my daughter. And I know about your plans to destroy her reputation to save your own worthless hide." "That's not, I didn't," Rick was stammering, looking desperately around the room as if seeking an escape route. "Darling," Sophia said, her voice higher than usual. Maybe we should leave. Excellent idea, Miss Blake, Maggie said. But before you go, I thought you might like to know something interesting about your fiancé's business empire. We're not engaged, Sophia said quickly. Not yet, perhaps, but I'm sure Richard has promised you a wonderful life once our divorce is final, and he gains access to all that money. Maggie smiled sweetly. The only problem is, there isn't going to be any money. What are you talking about? Rick demanded. I'm talking about the fact that every major contract your company has held for the past 20 years was arranged by my father. Every oil deal, every government contract, every piece of business that made you wealthy, it all came through Harrison Petroleum's influence. The crowd around them was growing larger, drawn by the spectacle of New York's latest scandal playing out in real time. And as of this morning, William continued, every single one of those contracts has been terminated. Rick's face went from pale to green. You can't do that? I can do whatever I want. Son, it's my oil, my contracts, and my business relationships. William's smile was predatory. Turns out, when you betray a man's daughter, he tends to take it personally. Ladies and gentlemen, the bandleader announced, apparently unaware of the drama unfolding near the bar. Mr. Richard Reynolds has asked to make an announcement. All eyes turned to Rick, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. Maggie realized that he must have planned to announce his engagement to Sophia tonight, probably thinking it would be the perfect way to cement his victory over his discarded wife. Go ahead, darling, Sophia whispered urgently. Tell them about us. Rick walked slowly to the microphone that had been set up near the orchestra, his face the color of chalk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. I have an announcement to make about my future plans. He paused, looking out at the crowd of New York's elite, all watching him with rapt attention. Actually, Maggie said, stepping forward, I think I'll make the announcement instead. She walked to the microphone with the confidence of a woman who had just discovered she owned the room. Rick tried to stop her, but William's hand on his shoulder kept him in place. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Margaret Harrison Reynolds, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. Many of you know me as Richard's wife, but tonight I'd like you to meet me as William Harrison's daughter. The murmur that went through the crowd was like electricity. Everyone in the room knew who William Harrison was. For the past 22 years, I've stood by my husband's side as he built what appeared to be a business empire. Tonight, I want to share some truths about how that empire was really built and what's going to happen to it now. Rick tried again to reach the microphone, but this time it was David Martinez who stepped into his path. Maggie's eyes widened as she realized that Rick's own lawyer was blocking him. Mr. Martinez, she said into the microphone, would you like to share with everyone what you told me this afternoon? David Martinez stepped forward, his professional demeanor intact despite the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, as of this afternoon, Mr. Richard Reynolds is under federal indictment for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges stem from his theft of over $12 million from the Reynolds Family Foundation. The ballroom erupted. Cameras appeared from nowhere as society photographers captured the moment. Rick stood frozen, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. Furthermore, Martinez continued, Mrs. Reynolds has been cleared of all charges and is now considered a victim of Mr. Reynolds' criminal enterprise. This is insane, Sophia Blake said, her theatrical training finally kicking in as she realized she needed to distance herself from the disaster. Darling, I had no idea about any of this. I simply cannot be associated with criminal activity. She turned and walked away, her red dress a streak of color disappearing through the crowd. Rick watched her go with the expression of a man watching his last hope walking out the door. Richard, Maggie said, her voice carrying over the chaos. You wanted to know what happens when you throw away 22 years of marriage for a younger woman? Rick looked at her with the expression of a broken man. You find out that you never deserved what you had in the first place. As the police arrived to escort Rick from the ballroom, Maggie stood at the microphone feeling something she had never experienced before. The sweet taste of justice served exactly as it should be. Now listen here, everyone, William said, stepping up beside his daughter at the microphone. Let me introduce you to the new president of the Harrison Foundation for Women's Empowerment, my daughter, Margaret Harrison. The applause was thunderous, but Maggie barely heard it. She was watching Rick being led away in handcuffs, finally understanding that some chapters of your life don't end, they get rewritten completely. The ballroom erupted in chaos, but Maggie felt a strange calm wash over her as she stepped up to the microphone. Cameras flashed like lightning, reporters pushed forward with questions, and the elite of New York society buzzed with excitement at witnessing the scandal of the decade unfold in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maggie said, her voice cutting through the noise, "if I could have your attention for just a few more minutes." The crowd quieted, drawn by the composure of a woman who should have been devastated, but instead radiated quiet strength. 22 years ago, I married Richard Reynolds because I loved him and believed in the man I thought he was. Tonight, I want you to understand what kind of man he really is." She gestured to David Martinez, who stepped forward with a briefcase full of documents. "Mr. Martinez, would you please explain to everyone what we discovered when we examined the financial records of Reynolds Industries?" David Martinez opened his briefcase with the precision of a man who had been preparing for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Reynolds has been systematically embezzling funds from the Reynolds Family Foundation for over 3 years. But more than that, he has been creating false documentation to make it appear that his wife was the mastermind behind the theft." The crowd gasped. In their world, financial crime was one thing, but framing your spouse was beyond the pale. "The evidence is overwhelming," Martinez continued. "Forged signatures on bank documents, backdated emails sent from Mrs. Reynolds' computer after Mr. Reynolds had accessed it, even falsified meeting minutes claiming that Mrs. Reynolds had authorized the transfers." Rick, who was standing between two police officers, tried to interrupt. "That's not true. Maggie knew about everything. She signed the documents. I signed blank pages that you told me were insurance forms," Maggie said into the microphone, her voice steady. "I trusted my husband of 22 years when he asked me to sign documents for our family's financial planning. The digital forensics are quite clear," Martinez added. "Mr. Reynolds used his administrative access to his wife's email account to send authorizations that she never wrote. He scheduled them to be sent at times when Mrs. Reynolds was attending charity events, creating alibis for her presence elsewhere while appearing to conduct criminal business." "But why?" someone called out from the crowd. "Why would Richard destroy his own wife?" William Harrison stepped up to the microphone beside his daughter. "Because he needed a scapegoat for his crimes, and he thought my daughter was weak enough to be sacrificed." His voice carried the weight of decades of power and influence. What he didn't know was that Margaret is stronger than he ever imagined. And what he certainly didn't know was that she had a father who's been protecting her from the shadows for 22 years. "Mr. Harrison," a reporter called out, "can you explain your relationship with Mr. Reynolds' business empire?" "Gladly." William's smile was sharp as a blade. "Every major contract that Reynolds Industries has held for the past 2 decades came through my influence. Every oil deal, every government contract, every business relationship that made Richard Reynolds wealthy, I facilitated it all." The murmur that went through the crowd was like a wave. Everyone understood what this meant. "I built that man's empire as a way of providing for my daughter, whom I had been unable to claim due to the sealed adoption records. I threw business his way. I opened doors for him. I made him rich beyond his wildest dreams, all so that my daughter would have a comfortable life." Rick's face had gone from pale to gray. "You're lying. I built my company with my own skills." "Son, you couldn't negotiate your way out of a paper bag without my help," William interrupted. "I have recordings of every conversation we had over the years, documents showing every favor I called in on your behalf, and witnesses to every deal I arranged for you." He pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Rick's voice filled the ballroom, clear and damning. "Bill, I need you to talk to Senator Morrison about that pipeline deal. Without your support, Reynolds Industries won't even get considered for the contract. You know I'm completely dependent on your connections for these government projects." "That conversation took place 3 years ago," William said, stopping the recording. "I have dozens more just like it." The police officers flanking Rick tightened their grip as he swayed on his feet. "And as of this morning," William continued, "every single one of those contracts has been terminated. Reynolds Industries will be filing for bankruptcy within the week." Sophia Blake, who had been trying to edge toward the exit, stopped dead in her tracks. Her face went white as she realized the implications. Furthermore, Martinez added, the criminal investigation has expanded. We've discovered evidence that Mr. Reynolds has been involved in tax evasion, securities fraud, and money laundering through offshore accounts. The federal prosecutors are estimating that he'll face between 20 and 30 years in prison, Williams said with satisfaction. Assuming he's convicted on all counts, which seems likely given the evidence. Rick finally found his voice. This is all lies. You're destroying me because you can't stand that I fell in love with someone else. No, Richard, Maggie said, stepping back to the microphone. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that stealing from children's charities was acceptable. You destroyed yourself when you chose to frame me for your crimes, and you destroyed yourself when you underestimated the woman you've been married to for 22 years. She paused, looking out at the crowd of people who had been her social circle for decades. I want everyone here to understand something. For 22 years, I believed that I was nothing without my husband. I believed that his success was my security, that his approval was my worth, that his love was my identity. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Tonight, I've learned that I am the daughter of one of the most powerful men in America. I've learned that I'm worth more money than I ever imagined. But most importantly, I've learned that my value has nothing to do with any man's opinion of me. The applause that erupted was genuine and sustained. These people recognized strength when they saw it, and they were witnessing the birth of a new power player in their social ecosystem. The Harrison Foundation for Women's Empowerment will be dedicated to helping women over 50 who are starting new chapters in their lives, Maggie continued. Whether they're leaving abusive marriages, starting new careers, or simply learning to value themselves after years of putting others first. What about Mr. Reynolds' company? A reporter called out. What about it? William replied. It's worthless without my contracts, and it's radioactive because of his criminal behavior. I wouldn't be surprised if the creditors liquidate everything within 60 days. Rick was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling behind him like a sandcastle at high tide. As the police officers escorted him through the crowd, Maggie heard him say one last thing. You'll never be happy without me. Maggie, you're nothing without me. She looked at him with something that might have been pity. No, Richard, you were nothing without me. You just never realized it. As the ballroom slowly emptied, with reporters rushing to file their stories and society figures gossiping about the evening's revelations, Maggie stood with her father beside the empty microphone. How do you feel, little girl? William asked. Free, she said without hesitation. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. And what are you going to do with that freedom? Maggie smiled, looking out at the city lights visible through the ballroom's tall windows. Change the world, starting tomorrow. 6 months later, Maggie sat on the porch of her new ranch house in Texas, listening to the peaceful sounds of horses and wind through the trees. The morning sun painted the rolling hills in shades of gold and amber, and the air smelled of fresh grass and possibility. The house was smaller than the Manhattan penthouse had been, but it felt infinitely larger. Built of native stone and weathered wood, it complemented the landscape rather than dominating it. Every room was filled with natural light, and every window offered a view of the ranch that was slowly becoming her true home. Her phone rang, interrupting her peaceful morning meditation. The caller ID showed Janet Cooper. Honey, let me tell you something. Janet's familiar voice came through clearly, despite the distance. Karma has a wicked sense of timing? What happened now? Maggie asked, settling deeper into her rocking chair. Your narcissistic ex-husband got sentenced yesterday. 25 years. No possibility of parole for 15. And get this, Sophia Blake testified against him in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Maggie felt a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction, but it was overwhelmed by relief. So it's really over. It's really over. Rick Reynolds will be an old man when he gets out of prison, assuming he lives that long, and Sophia Blake is apparently dating some tech billionaire in Silicon Valley. The baby was born last month. By the way, a little girl. I hope she grows up to be smarter than her parents, Maggie said, and meant it. Speaking of smart women, I saw the article about your foundation in the Times. $5 million raised in 6 months? That's incredible. Maggie smiled. thinking about the letters that arrived daily from women across the country. Women who had found the courage to leave bad marriages, start new careers, or simply learn to value themselves for the first time in decades. The money helps, but it's the stories that matter. Yesterday, I got a letter from a woman in Ohio who left an abusive husband after 30 years of marriage. She's 58 years old, and she just started her own business. What kind of business? She makes custom quilts. She said she'd always wanted to do it, but her husband told her it was a waste of time. Maggie's voice grew warm. She sent me a photo of her first commission, a wedding quilt for her daughter. It was beautiful. You're changing lives, Maggie. We're changing lives. The foundation is just the beginning. After she hung up with Janet, Maggie walked to her home office, a sun-filled room overlooking the horse pastures. The walls were lined with thank you letters from women who had received grants from the Harrison Foundation, each one a testament to the power of second chances. Her laptop chimed with a new email. It was from Dr. Sarah Chen, a 53-year-old physician who had received a foundation grant to open a free clinic for women's health services in rural Montana. Dear Ms. Harrison, the email began, I wanted to update you on the clinic's progress. We've served over 300 women in our first 3 months, many of whom had never had proper health care. Your foundation didn't just give me money, it gave me the courage to pursue a dream I'd abandoned when I got married 30 years ago. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Maggie printed the email and added it to the growing stack of success stories on her desk. Each letter reminded her why she had chosen this path. A soft knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. William appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his favorite weekend uniform of jeans and a work shirt. Morning, little girl. How are the world changers doing today? Changing the world, one woman at a time, Maggie replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. What's on your agenda? I thought I'd ride out to the north pasture and check on the new foals. Want to come with me? I'd love to. They saddled 2 horses and rode out across the ranch in comfortable silence. The relationship between father and daughter was still new, but it grew stronger every day. William had been patient as Maggie learned to trust again, and she had been gracious as he learned to be a parent to a grown woman. I got a call from Charlie Whitman yesterday, William said as they paused to watch a mare and her foal grazing in the morning sunshine. About the Reynolds Industries bankruptcy. The final liquidation was completed. The creditors recovered about 30 cents on the dollar. Everything else was lost to legal fees and Rick's criminal activity. Maggie felt a pang of sympathy for the employees who had lost their jobs, but no regret about Rick's downfall. What about the penthouse? Sold at auction. Some tech entrepreneur from California bought it. William's smile was wry. Paid about half what Rick paid for it. And our old life disappears completely. Your old life, William corrected gently. Your new life is just beginning. They rode back to the house as the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky. After lunch, Maggie drove into Dallas for a speaking engagement at the Women's Business Network monthly meeting. The ballroom at the Adolphus Hotel was packed with women of all ages, from recent college graduates to seasoned executives. Maggie stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reminded her of her own journey. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over, she began. I was 47 years old, getting divorced, facing criminal charges, and convinced that my best years were behind me. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I had spent 22 years defining myself through someone else's success, someone else's approval, someone else's love. When that was taken away, I thought I had nothing left. She paused, making eye contact with women throughout the audience. I was wrong. I didn't have nothing left. I had everything I needed. I had intelligence, experience, determination, and most importantly, I had the courage to start over. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Harrison, it's easier to start over when you inherit $200 million. What about those of us who don't have that advantage? Maggie smiled. You're absolutely right. Money makes everything easier. But money doesn't create courage, and it doesn't create vision, and it doesn't create the determination to rebuild your life from scratch. She stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the audience. The first step I took wasn't spending money. It was making a phone call to a father I'd never known. The second step was standing up to a man who had intimidated me for years. The third step was walking into a courtroom and telling the truth about my life. But what if we're scared? Another woman asked. Then you're normal, Maggie replied with a laugh. I was terrified every single day for months. I'm still scared sometimes. Fear doesn't disqualify you from starting over. It just means you're doing something important enough to matter. After the speech, Maggie was surrounded by women wanting to share their stories. A 60-year-old accountant who was starting her own firm, a 55-year-old teacher who was writing her first novel, a 49-year-old mother of 3 who was going back to medical school. You've given us hope, one woman said, tears in her eyes. You've shown us that our lives aren't over just because our marriages are. Driving back to the ranch that evening, Maggie reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, she had been Margaret Reynolds, a woman who existed in the shadow of her husband's success. Tonight, she was Margaret Harrison, a woman creating her own legacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Saw your speech on the local news. You're going to be dangerous with all that confidence. Maggie smiled and texted back, I certainly hope so. As she pulled into her driveway, she saw William sitting on the porch with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. How did the speech go? He asked as she settled into the chair beside him. I think we may have recruited a few more world changers. Good. The world needs changing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of Texas. In the distance, horses grazed peacefully, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Daddy, Maggie said, using the word that still felt new but increasingly natural. Do you ever regret the choices you made when I was young? William was quiet for a long moment. I regret that I was too afraid to be the father you deserved, but I don't regret that you became the woman you are. You're stronger than I ever was. Little girl, you're going to do things I never dreamed of. We're going to do things, Maggie corrected. Together. Together, William agreed. As the night settled around them, Maggie felt a peace she had never known existed. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her phone chimed with one last email of the day. It was from a young woman in Seattle who had read about the foundation online. Dear Ms. Harrison, the message began, I'm 28 years old and going through a difficult divorce. My husband was controlling and abusive, and I've spent the last 5 years believing that I'm worthless without him. Reading about your story has given me hope that maybe I can rebuild my life too. I don't know if you accept applications from women my age, but I wanted you to know that you've already helped me just by showing me what's possible. Maggie immediately typed back, Dear Sarah, courage has no age limit. Starting over at 28 means you have decades to build the life you deserve. Call our office on Monday, we'd love to help. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, looking up at the stars scattered across the Texas sky. What are you thinking about? William asked. I'm thinking about all the women out there who are sitting in the dark right now, convinced that their lives are over because someone told them they weren't worth anything. Maggie's voice was soft but determined. I'm thinking about how many of them we can reach, how many lives we can change, how many dreams we can help come true. And I'm thinking that I spent 47 years thinking I was just a housewife. Turns out I was always meant for something bigger. William raised his wineglass. To something bigger. To new beginnings, Maggie replied, clinking her glass against his. As they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the Texas night, Maggie realized that sometimes the best chapter of your life starts with someone else closing the book on you. She had learned that financial independence after 50 was possible, that women supporting women could create miracles, and that a midlife transformation could turn a victim into a victor. Most importantly, she had learned that it's never too late to discover who you really are. The stars shone down on Margaret Harrison, oil heiress, foundation president, and living proof that the most powerful revenge is a life well lived. Her story was just beginning.